PPMA, and I'm delighted to welcome you to another one of our PPMA in Conversation with webinars. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Steve Marshall, who I actually found out yesterday is a professor, but Steve would rather use his title as doctor. And Steve, for those of you who don't know, is from Ashridge Hult Business School, an extraordinary educational institution that has 5 campuses globally. So this is a huge treat for us. So Steve, I'm just going to hand over to you just so that you can talk to us a little bit more about what you do and your background.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for having me, and thanks to all of those people that got up very early this morning if you're at the States. Really appreciate it. And I'm watching people join the participant list there and feeling a bit intimidated, actually, and I think I admitted to this the other day. I'm not the sort of academic that, well, academia used to happen in ivory towers, you know, it's, that's how it was, and we could, well, my view of it was that academics sat around and read books and occasionally spoke to students. It doesn't really seem like that these days, and academics are rock stars and lifestyle gurus. You know, they tell us to meditate and what to eat and when to get up, and everybody's got a TED talk. So I'm not really like that, I have to say. So this is a bit intimidating. I was thinking, Karen, it's unlikely that I'm ever going to come to you with a load of prescriptions and land my helicopter on the lawn and go, here I am. But I might sort of, I like the idea of sliding a love letter under the door. So, there you go.
That's fantastic. That's really wonderful. Thank you. One of the reasons, Steve, why, I mean, you and I actually have been doing some work together over these last months through these extraordinary times in our lives. And one of the fascinating things I think has been about the space that COVID has created unwittingly for many of us to talk about topics that absolutely impact the workplace, but we generally don't talk about very often. So hence the reason why we wanted to give people the opportunity to start to think about these topics. And something that you and I have been talking about is paying attention and how we notice things that are going on around us. And I'm just interested to get your views on how paying attention has been encouraged through COVID.
Yeah, I mean, well, I do think it has given us space, and it's given us space to step away from the otherwise urgent things. You know, we've had an enforced moment there, so we can look at things that are other than the normal day-to-day. And I'm always reminded of a Stanford academic called James March, who was a lovely guy, sadly left us now. And he used to start his classes by saying, I'm not now, nor have I ever been relevant, which I think I'm going to steal off him, which will not go down well at Hult, because Hult attempts to be, I quote, the most relevant business school in the world. Okay. And I think they do a good job, and it's very focused effort, you know. But this idea that actually academics can't really tell anybody, you know, what to do. And what I think James March was saying was, look, I'll give you some ideas and you can go and apply them. And we've had time to do that, to think a little bit differently in COVID. So, you know, we've had the time to step back and think, and somebody like James March is saying, look, if I can offer you beautiful and evocative ideas, then you can go and apply these. I can't apply them for you. COVID's given us that space. And I think it's given a lot of other people the kind of courage, really, I guess, to step out of the center, because we're all finding ourselves a bit marginalized now by COVID. You know, we're working at the edges, and that's where the seers and the shamans have typically hung out. You know, they're not in the crowd. They live on the edges of the village, and they look in and they drop in every now and again until the village gets fed up with them and they get thrown out. So I think COVID has given us license to be a bit weird and to think differently.
I think that's just a beautiful way of thinking about this, actually. And you and I mean, I've used the word magic recently quite a bit around it. This feels like something alchemical has been happening. And I'm really interested in what you say there about the relevance, because and I'm keen to get your view on how relevance sort of in the workplace bleeds into society. So the thing I'm thinking about is, obviously we've been really, really focused on our frontline workers. So they have perceived societally to be very, very relevant, but we don't necessarily think about having the conversations about relevancy in our organisations. Do you sort of have a view as to why you think that might be?
Well, I guess what we perceive these days to be the VUCA environment, this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous thing that people have been talking about for a few years now. We don't deal very well with complexity. And so, and I think complexity takes space for us to work around, and it's anxiety provoking. So the easier thing to do is to, resort almost to command and control, and to say to people, I'm expecting this. If as a leader I'm frightened, it may be that I might run away, but I might also say, what I want is assurance and control, and I want this to happen, and I won't be done by this stage. So, we tend to be very specific in moments like that, which I don't think is, helpful. It can be paradoxical, be useful, I think, to step out of that, I would say.
And that's I think there's a paradox, isn't there, as well, in this idea of noticing and paying attention. And I don't know, I know you've talked there about space. Is there something that drives us to move from noticing to actually paying attention to the extent that you're focusing your energy? Because I'm thinking, I notice loads of things around the study, but I don't necessarily pay, focused attention to them. So interested in how you might encourage that.
Yeah, it's. I think it's a definite skill, and I don't think it. Again, it's one of these paradoxes where the more you think about it, the harder it becomes. We need to step away from that. So I think a lot of my work that I do these days with photography and video and digital is, I guess I have a process, so people get quite excited, thankfully, about the blogs that I write. And I was speaking to Samantha Crossley yesterday, who's an academic at Leeds. I don't know if she's on the call, but she was saying, sometimes you say things in the blog that were right on my mind, right at the front of my attention. And I think that's by design, and there is method and there is technique in that. So my method and technique around that is to go around my life, reading the papers, listening to podcasts, and generally, run of the mill kind of fairly, I listen to the news, fairly dutiful attention in that kind of way, and I also kind of wander, and so I see a lot of things in the news that get my attention, and I can't quite reconcile. They're troublesome. There are issues that we are struggling with when we think very rationally about them. And so my parallel process, if you like, is to wander. And I wander with my camera, for example, and I will just take pictures of things that catch my attention without really paying much attention to why they're catching my attention, if you know what I mean. So it's a quite relaxed, open process. And then I continue to just ponder them, and I'll come back to this computer and I'll look back through the images and think, well, what was going on there when I took that picture? What was happening? So there's this background of all the issues that we're trying to consciously solve, and this unintentional, partly subconscious imaginal process that feels much more, artistic, if you like. And I just pick on something and go, what was that about? And then I use the image as a way to sort of decode, work my way into the more rational pieces, and I swap from side to side. So when I publish an image on my blog and I write, a fairly sparse number of words, to be honest, what I'm doing is I'm paying quite a lot of attention to my felt responses to the world, a kind of embodied felt response. And I dig quite deeply into myself to think, what's going on here? And if you listen to people like Carl Rogers, humanistic psychologist, he would say in the most personal is the most general. So
Yeah.
as I dig right in, I then try and bring this back out into the world, contextualize it a little bit, not too much, because I want to give people space to wander about. And then I go, there you are, that's this week's love letter, if you like. It's kind of an offer, and people go,
Yeah.
well, I was thinking that too. And it's
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
inevitable.
Yeah, and it goes back to, this is why I love that you use the language alchemy and spirituality and what have you, because as you were talking there, the way a way that I understood that is that actually that's quite active mindfulness, and we talk a lot about mindfulness these days, obviously, and mindfulness isn't just about meditation, but there is something, isn't there, about space and having your own process that creates that spark that allows you to think and to feel and absorb differently. And I wonder whether, it seems to me the approach that you've described there is something we should be encouraging our leaders to adopt and to follow.
Well, I definitely think that the work of leaders needs to shift in the circumstances that we face, because it's very consequential. And I've had quite an interesting career from being working in advertising, fashion, and editorial photography I spent 20 odd years as a fighter pilot, which is kind of a weird thing. And now I find myself as an academic change person, consultant. But the reason that the aviation link is interesting to me is because there are very good statistics that come out of environments where there are black boxes and voice recorders and cameras everywhere. So we can look quite hard at some of the data. And the thing that struck me about that environment was, you can tell when fighter pilots land and they've had a contentious mission, because they're always going, what was your picture? What were you thinking? What was your essay? Situational awareness, which is kind of like, well, how aware were you through that whole sortie? Because you seemed to do that at one stage, and I didn't know why you did that. If I'm looking at my wingman, where did you go for 5 minutes? I lost you. What were you thinking? And situational awareness, I got very interested in what situational awareness did for our decision making. And we found out that situational awareness was almost logarithmically related to good outcomes. So if you had good situational awareness, you were aware of the whole space-time thing that was going on around you, where things are happening quite quickly, very VUCA, you weren't 10% better than your colleagues, you were 10 times better.
Wow.
And the data supports this. And so we knew that good situational awareness would generally lead to very good outcomes. And bad situational awareness could be catastrophic. And I can sort of deconstruct this for you if it's helpful. But.
Yeah, it really is. I tell you for why, because obviously one of my other questions into that is do you think there's a limit to the span of control? The reason why I'm asking the question is that obviously so many of us in public services are kind of focused on delivering place-based services, and our places aren't kind of like, this little bit. They're extraordinary, and we talk about whole systems all the time. And I do wonder about, is there a cognitive limit on what we can do? So deconstructing that process will be great. Thank you.
Okay. So, well, we might come to the cognitive limits, I guess. But
yeah.
Imagine, so if we deconstruct situational awareness, simplest example I can think of is I'm driving my car on the motorway and I crash into the car in front. Now, I didn't do that because I didn't understand how my car worked. I got it, but if I press the accelerator, I go faster, and if I hit the brake, I go slower. So it's not that I don't understand how everything works. And it's not that I can't figure out the future, oddly. We spend a lot of time strategically trying to work out the future, and the future is broadly obvious to most people. So if I'm going faster than the car in front and it's slowing down, sure as eggs is eggs, I'm going to hit it, okay? But so we've got two things going on there, two components of situational awareness, which turn out to be minor ones, actually. Comprehension, how does it work? And projection, what's going to happen next? We're quite good at that. But the reason that I crashed my car is because I was messing with a sat-nav, or I dropped a bag of sweets in my lap, or I was, trying to change music tracks or something like that. I wasn't paying attention. Okay, so when we get back into cockpits, or we get back into places where we are actively filming what people do these days, I mean, even bus drivers have black boxes, right? We find that the errors in situational awareness, the things that will trip us up, 76% of the time, it's perception. We just didn't notice.
Wow.
20% of the time, it's comprehension. I didn't know what that switch did, and I pressed it anyway. And 4% of the time, projection. So as leaders and managers, I think we can stop telling people what to do in complex, high demand, volatile situations. But what we can say to them is, look, I can use my position as a leader, a manager, to give you information and to help you notice. And I can trust you to figure out what's going to happen next. So sure, everybody has cognitive limits, but we generally cope well enough. But the thing that leaders and managers can do is help people notice and protect their attention. Once we start, micromanaging or dropping things on them constantly, their attention goes. And, it's catastrophic. Your situational awareness goes off a cliff.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that just encapsulates a lot of the experience that employers and employees are having at the moment. So where particularly we don't actually see people within our physical vicinity, the increased reporting we've had of managers feeling really uncomfortable about not seeing people has been extraordinary, because the reality is, for lots of people, they're reporting that being at home, it might not be ideal, but actually we haven't seen a drop in productivity per se. In fact, in many areas, absence levels have dropped in public services, which is really extraordinary. And I think some of that comes to do with meaning and wisdom, which we'll also talk about. But actually, there is that real tension between new physical ways of working that, are supported and enabled through technology like this, and forcing managers and leaders to really think about how we engage and how we get the best out of our people. Yeah. And I suppose we don't really encourage our leaders and managers to wander and to look at an image and to just sort of be and reflect and sort of lose the connection to their role and think about them personally and how they can better relate to their role. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as we get more dispersed, the work of communication needs to go up. But not the kind of instrumental communication. I mean, it's almost like the work of relationship needs to be, the relational work needs to be lifted. And typically speaking, if you look into the literature on this, men are not very good at this at all. And it's in the literature, it typically says that women in organizations do the relational work, which then gets discounted and ignored. It doesn't, checking that people are okay and feeling good about themselves is not seen as proper work. So that gets discounted. But I think there's a lot, from my perspective, there's an awful lot to be said for just hanging out with folk, kind of seeing their world, being alongside them, and then the work becomes something like, hey, do you realize the guys over there are doing this as well? Can I connect you? That's how we use the privilege of leadership well, I think. It's about, in these kind of environments, making the links, creating community, and saying to people, do we think we're the sort of people that could be doing that? And then we've got, the capacity to take on, to take on issues and to enable people then to go off and sort it out themselves. They can do that. We know they can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That connection word, I think, is incredibly powerful and profound, actually, and it connects to meaning and wisdom. And you wrote one of your most recent blogs, not the one at the weekend, I think it was the one last week, just lit a fire around the community, and you were talking about actually how through the experience of COVID you were starting to think differently about your work and meaning and wisdom. Would you share a bit more about that with us?
Yeah, sort of beyond COVID, really. I mean, it's been gnawing away at me for about 15 years, if I'm honest. But COVID kind of gave me the license to go, right, I'm done with this now. I'm going to get out there. And that, again, I think is about this relaxation of direct control and about and thinking about the way that we think. I think it's that we know that if we do the things we've always done, we get what we've always got. We really do need to transform. There's a big push behind us now to transform, and that's kind of my day job, to help people to do that. So given that we need to transform, we can't do what we've always done. I would also say we can't think what we've always thought. So how do we bring attention and thinking? How do we put that under the spotlight? And I don't think there's a right answer for this. It's not a 2x2 matrix or anything like that. But I do think that I'm in the sort of insight business, and how can I help people to see what's going on, for them to see from their perspective what's happening, and act accordingly, really. And I guess the learning that I've had from the blog, I think social media is a great thing because you can chuck stuff out there, which is, I'm quite disciplined about putting it out there these days, but ideas come back at you if they're good and if they resonate with people and if they have meaning, which is data, really. But I think really in my sense of this is that we need to present data in different ways because data itself doesn't persuade. And so I'm trying to work in those blogs. Visual is my kind of thing, but people say that the words work. I have a bit of a blindness about that. But I'm trying to be evocative, lead from that perspective rather than, hey, look, climate change is a nightmare. Let's do something about it. Here are the statistics, parts per million and all that kind of thing. If you look at something like climate change, I think the more effective messages, put Al Gore, highly data-driven and, instructional, prescriptive about climate, up against somebody like Drew Dellinger with Hieroglyphic Stairway, that poem, if you haven't seen it, it's remarkable. But he says in there, I have teams of scientists feeding me data daily and pleading I immediately turn it into poetry. Because poetry goes whack, gets you in the heart, and you're likely to do something. So he's inviting us to think differently, and I do think poets are kind of at the forward edge of that. A lot of artists tend to be, it's political, isn't it? But artists tend to get thrown into prison fairly quickly come the revolution because nobody wants anybody to be thinking about anything or to be noticing what's going on. So I think that shift of evocative spaces rather than direct solutions.
That speaks to my heart actually in loads of different ways, because obviously the HR and OD field, as we're always under the cosh, sometimes rightly and oftentimes it's not fair, but that's sort of, most HR directors sort of wish they'd one day wake up as an accountant sometimes because it would be easier, and I think IT people also wish they could wake up and be a gardener or something, I don't know, but I think this idea of I'm going to use the word spirit, Steve, because that's the best word I can use to convey this actually, because we've had we always get whacked about demonstrate to me that this will make a difference, and the argument I always put back is sometimes the stuff that you can't measure but actually is going to make a difference. So I think a lot of what you're encapsulating is storytelling, and it is that sense of connection and the relational work. If you can make somebody understand how it's going to impact them, help them feel, and if you move one person's heart, they'll go and influence somebody else, and so it's the butterfly in the tsunami thing, isn't it? I think that's critical. So how would you encourage us? And before I finish that, I just want to say to everybody, because I'm just so carried away with talking to Steve because I could do it all day. If there are questions that you want to ask, please do so. If there's something you'd like us to shift, you do that as well, we will. But Steve, how would you encourage us to encourage those conversations in our organisations as well? Because I think we've got a real opportunity now where yearning and meaning and connection has resonance more than we ever might have thought possible.
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, I think that at some level we need to encourage different quality criteria around conversation. So I'm thinking this through on my feet. It's a great question. Because, you know, as I think you said, we want, in some ways, demonstrable outputs, and mostly that's done by counting. In Western business, you know, we count stuff, and you know, I like rationalist paradigm. You know, we've been living with that for the last 300 years, and I like it when I drive over a bridge and it doesn't fall over. I like it that my car works every morning, you know, if it needs to. The house is still standing. You know, this is rationalist, you know, data-driven work. But it's not very good in the complexity of human relationships. And I think that I'm tempted to use our doctoral program at Ashridge as an example of a different set of quality criteria, because this has been, or it was, very carefully thought through. And what we look for when somebody presents their doctoral work is things like, do I trust this person? You know, are they trustworthy in what they're saying to me? Do I kind of get them? Now, there are some very, you know, technical words for these, like verisimilitude and things like that. But it's like, yeah, I get you. I see you. I can, if I get that too. Yeah, that happens to me. That, you know, we've got that in common. When they're talking about their professional practice and dealing with things like trust or uncertainty or, you know, difficult situations in a professional doctorate, you know, it's about work. So if we can come alongside them and go, yeah, I see you. I got you. I get that. That's a set of quality criteria, and we can put bullet points about those and deconstruct them in very technical terms, which we do. But it's more that, I think, than, you know, 8 out of 10 cats said. You know, that's not helpful data, especially when we're speaking to individuals. Generalized cases are fine, but, you know, you speak to any medic and they say, well, the generalized dose for this drug is this, but actually there's no generalized human being ever sits in front of me. So I have to get right alongside them and come to know them. So I think that's the sort of territory we're in there.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's such a dichotomy between what you know, the landscape, the situational awareness that our leaders have today, isn't it? That, you know, there's a budget, there's these key partnership relationships, and so on and so forth. And, you know, we've got bounded organisations, bounded sets of things and people in work groups. But actually, the chances of us really understanding what's going on at multiple levels, within, between, and so on and so forth, it actually probably is nowhere near as high as we think it is, looking at it from the perspective of organisational boundary, would you think?
Say that to me again.
So my reflection on what you said is, because I'm with you, I think, you know, I basically think human beings are messy and organisations are really messy. But you know, if we're talking to our leaders about this, they're basically, their perspective, their situational awareness is, I've got this thing in front of me and it's got these boundaries, and my organisation stops here, and I've got partnerships over here, and yes, there's a crossover and all of the rest of it. But that perspective, Steve, is so far removed from what actually goes on in our organisations. And I just think, you know, it's, how can we sort of weave together a leadership and a management capability that enables us to A, know that that's the risk, and B, put those mechanisms in place that helps us accept the fact that uncertainty is a day-to-day part of the work, and we shouldn't try and take that out unnecessarily. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So you know, I think if I go into my own experience of this and some of the theory of it, you know, choosing to see organizations as bounded systems is a choice, you know, and actually we can choose to see them as relationships, and every relationship is different and unique. And for me, there's something about, how do we hold that systemic view? Of course it's helpful. How do we not necessarily privilege that, but match it with the real day-to-day messy meeting people, and, you know, who are you and how can I come alongside you? Then who are we? What is it that we can offer? And how do we see this situation? How do we see this system in front of us? Because we will have different perspectives, seeing it from different angles, you know. And we each bring different, we each have our own version of the information that we're putting forward, the data into that. And we can each trade data. But at the end of the day, unless we see each other, we can't be in the kind of relationship that's going to make any difference. And I guess some of the, and I've been experimenting with bringing, with literally with helping people to see each other. And I was going to show you some imagery. If we've got time, I can still do that.
We do, that'd be great.
I use video and imagery to really help people to see each other. And part of the, and part of my research is I don't know how this works, but I know that it does work. And so here we have, if I can do a share screen, to that image. So this is a picture of the Academy of Professional Dialogue's convention that they have every year, and they're checking out. And part of my work is to put a video camera on somebody and say to them, what is it that you'd like to say? And these are comparatively small screens to the ones that I normally work with. So I make these people very big. And their job is to just be themselves. The audience's job is to really witness and acknowledge and notice this person. Doesn't, you know, demonstrably, they don't seem to be doing much except sitting there and paying attention. And what happens is extraordinarily creative, well, extraordinary creativity and authenticity is unleashed in these people as they sit there. And it's quite just a profound moment. There's 80 people in that room and one person is being witnessed. And if you think, you know, their face is quite big, and again, not all that big on those screens, but you don't notice, you don't see people that close unless you're waking up next to them or something like that. So there's, even in a room of 80 people, there's a tremendous intimacy goes on there. So I'm kind of experimenting with that level of intimacy in my work. And let me just see if I can share a different picture. I think I have to stop share and then reshare.
It's a lovely word, actually, whilst you're getting your other picture. Intimate, it's not something we talk about a lot in work, is it, intimacy? And neither's love, actually. And ironically, I'm not sure whether Helena's on the call, but we're going to be talking to Helena Clayton on Friday about the role of love in leadership, and that's going to be really interesting as well. So it's, I
think love and eldership and wisdom very closely linked.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it?
Let me just, here's a picture I took of Steve Chapman, and some people know his work. And Steve wanted to, we were doing some work together, and he has this thing, as you know, about playful with not knowing. And you watch him in his work, and he is such a brilliant operator. You know, he does his work fantastically. And I thought, yeah, you don't really not know, though, do you? You know. And the more I watched him very closely, and he would be working with a group, and all of a sudden, this look would flash across his face. And I thought, oh, now he doesn't know. Now he's really in it, you know? And I tried to get that sense of knowing and not knowing in this picture. And what I realized was Steve is quite frightened of cameras. And if you're a long way away, of course, it's fine. And if you're up close, I took a picture of his eye, and that was fine. The camera was about here. But there was a distance where he was a bit freaked out. And that's the distance. And he said to me afterwards, I really didn't like that. Amazing. And I said, yeah, I know. And that's the picture that everybody goes, yeah, that's him. You've got him there. That's what he does. So there is this sort of sense of, you know, if we witness people and really see them, that they come alive in front of us.
I really, you know, one of my takeaways from this is that I need to start encouraging our community to think differently and to be braver about using these words and talking about intimacy, encouraging our leaders and everybody, actually, you know, there's leadership roles and leadership behaviours and all the rest of it. And to some degree, not every leader is a leader, if you see what I mean. You know, you get fantastic people on the ground who do stuff and people follow because of their extraordinary qualities. But the more we talk in this way about seeing people, the more we role model making space for people to be, and to create and to reflect, that actually that is probably going to be the more effective and sustainable change than just saying that we've now got to do another transformation program to respond to the impact of COVID-19. And that certainly feels more satisfying at a heart level to me than let's just do another transformation program.
Yeah, and I think the wisdom in that for leaders is about, leaders need agendas and they need programs. They have to deliver on these things that are put in front of them. If we're working from a position of wisdom, it might go wrong. But what we're doing is we're sensing into the future and trying to say, look, it could be this. For me, it feels like it's this. And then we can say to people, if that matches your experience, then off you go. Or it might be that I offer something that is not relevant. People go, well, thanks, Steve, but not interested. And that's the risk that we take. But if we can get rid of this, I have an agenda, I know what's important, I know what's relevant, and we can work with wisdom. I think wisdom is about surfacing or seeing the emerging picture come, and as it's forming in front of us, saying, look, here it is. What do we make of that? And giving up on the prescriptions and the superstarness and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. And there's a lot of pressure, a lot of unnecessary pressure in putting the superstar status on people, isn't there? Yeah, it can be profoundly counterproductive, actually, particularly at the moment.
Yeah, I'm much more with the poets, So Mary Oliver's instructions for living a life: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. That just seems perfect to me. I don't know if I can get away with that on a day-to-day basis, but
and I think that's our challenge. That's our work, actually, in terms of bringing about a different. I think it's about bringing honesty and clarity and bravery and wisdom and generosity, bringing those lenses to the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. And actually we can all do that if, COVID, if nothing else, has demonstrated our frailty and our vulnerability as a human race. And sometimes that just changes our perspective in profound ways, doesn't it? It's really fascinating. Where sadly we've only got 2 minutes to go, and we did promise we were going to leave 10 minutes for questions, or between 5 to 10 minutes questions. Does anybody have a question? Don't worry if you don't, because it's just a joy to listen to somebody of Steve's just humanity and class, really. Any questions, anybody? No? Well, I'm hoping from smiley faces that you've enjoyed that masterclass in humanity. Thank you so much for joining us. And Steve, I hope we might be able to do this again, because you've just made my day. So our next webinar, everybody, is this Friday, and that is again at noon with Helena Clayton. Helena has also done some amazing work on the role of love and leadership in our workplaces. So we'd love to see you back then. You can also, if you want to listen to Steve again, you'll be able to download this from our website. So we'll pop the link out on social media over the next couple of days. But Steve, thank you again. Absolutely just a joy, and hopefully take care, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.